Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. We're going to start out tonight with a brief mention of Kate Millett, who died recently at the age of 82. She was a feminist author and artist, and she was an early and influential figure in the women's liberation movement. She's best known for her book Sexual Politics, which was published in 1970, and that book defined the goals and the strategies of the feminist movement. It was an overnight success, and it transformed her into a public figure. She was actually part of the second wave of feminism in the United States in the 1970s, where women's lib became discussions of the origins of women's oppression and the nature of sex and gender and the role of the family. Actually, one of the things I didn't like about her was she diminished the role of the family, and she rarely mentioned children. She was a little strident for my tastes. The other thing I didn't like too much about her, she didn't have much of a sense of humor. She was on one of these British talk shows once. They were all discussing the nature of oppression and women. And they had Oliver Reed on it. We've talked about Oliver Reed before. I mean, he was a good actor, but he fought with everybody. He was drunk all the time. He was a total male chauvinist pig. So he's spouting off his male chauvinism on this British talk show. And they're serving alcohol on the show. Now, what kind of idea is that? And all of a sudden, in the middle of the show, he leans over and kisses Kate Millett. And if you could have seen the look on her face, I have to tell you, it was worth every minute of it. She was just so stunned. I mean, he was inappropriate, and she got him kicked off the set, but it was really funny. He did the same thing to Shelley Winters when he was on The Tonight Show. She just poured a drink over his head. Anyway, Kate Millett is an important figure in late 20th century American feminism. And like I say, she was just a little too grim and humorless for my tastes. Well, just so I don't get accused of misogyny, we're going to move on to our feature tonight, who's also a woman, and it's a woman I admire a lot more than Kate Millett, Jeannie Rousseau. She died recently at the age of 98, and she was an Allied intelligence agent in occupied France during World War II. She also survived a little stint in 3 separate Nazi concentration camps. If you ask me, that's what's meant by women overcoming oppression. Here's Matthew Bannister, the BBC4 Last Word on Jeannie Rousseau.
Jeannie Rousseau was the French intelligence agent who risked her life many times to smuggle secrets from German officers to the British during the Second World War. She had a photographic memory and was able to alert Churchill's government to the development of V-1 flying bombs and V-2 rockets. Jeannie was the daughter of a formidable civil servant who didn't feel she was worth speaking to until she was 13 years old. Her wartime role wasn't publicly revealed until she was in her 70s, when she gave an interview to the journalist David Ignatius. He told us that the family had moved to Brittany after the German invasion, and that's where Jeannie began her undercover work.
One of her many remarkable gifts was as a linguist. Had almost fluent German. She said that she could be taken easily for a German native by the soldiers who were arriving. So she began passing secrets that she'd pick up in conversation with German officers she'd talked to. She told me that suddenly the Germans were encountering so many attacks in this little area of Brittany that they knew they had some kind of intelligence problem. They began rounding up people, and Jeannie was arrested in those early days. She was then a girl perhaps of 20, and was taken to the prison at Rennes. She was never broken, didn't confess. She was released on condition that she would leave the coastal area that was so sensitive, and went to Paris.
Jeannie's family friend, Jeremy Orme.
A chance encounter with one of her previous teachers led her to form a connection with one of the subsets of the biggest resistance intelligence gathering organizations, Alliance, and the subset, Les Druids. And she joined that. Her code name was Amniarix, and through that network, she was able and did provide information which came through to the British in London. I did not know whether she was in a network which was supplying information to the Free French and de Gaulle or to the British. And the immediate reply, with a degree of vehemence, was, when I asked her, to the British, of course, which I took to be not so much of anti-de Gaulle, but a cool-headed assessment where would the intelligence eventually be most useful.
She had befriended German officers who loved to talk with this charming, really quite beautiful young French woman, talk about their exploits, talk about their secrets. And hard as it is to imagine, some of these officers began to talk about a program that was underway in eastern Germany at a place called Peenemunde, where the Germans were developing extraordinary new weapons that would change the face of the war.
Second only to the atom bomb, V2 was the war's deadliest weapon.
Her most important information related to the production program, research and production program for the flying bombs, the V1 and the V2. And that information came through and was noticed by a scientific intelligence analyst, Reg Jones, working almost directly, I believe, to Churchill. As a result of that, not only together with other intelligence, was the decision taken to send the RAF to bomb the production facilities, which seriously degraded the German ability to get this program up and running, but also the intelligence was of such high quality, the decision was taken for her to be transferred, to be brought by night secretly across the channel by boat, to be debriefed in London. Somewhere there was a betrayal, but the Germans who had captured them did not know who she was or what was going on.
Jeannie was sent to 3 different camps. In the first, she, with other women prisoners, other incredibly courageous French women, rebelled and refused to make the ammunition that they were being ordered to make. It was just an accident of good luck that the Swedish Red Cross came, that her name was on a list of people they were looking for. They called out her name. The guards in this camp prevented Jeannie from answering. Incredibly, as a prisoner, half dead, she managed to intimidate her German guard. She was released, taken by the Swedish Red Cross. I think there must be, for someone who lives through that kind of hell on earth, a sense, how did I survive when so many around me didn't?
After the war, Jeannie became one of the top interpreters at the United Nations. She was a regular visitor to Jeremy Orme's home in London, and they went to the Imperial War Museum together.
She froze just before the top of the steps on the way up. She didn't move. And after a little while, I said, "Jeannie, are you feeling all right? Is there some problem?" And she says to me, "I'm quite all right." And she pointed up. High at the top of the atrium, the War Museum had then, and still has now, a V1 bomb and a V2 flying bomb hung up in the air. And she was looking at them and she said, "I never understood that that was their comparative size. I had seen engineering drawings, I had heard about them, I had never understood that one of them is so big and the other one comparatively small." I had exchanged notes with her at some point about a poem by Gerard Manley Hopkins in relation to Henry Purcell. It says and begins with the words, "Have fair fallen, O fair, fair have fallen, so dear to me, so arch is special a spirit as heaves in Henry Purcell." Her interest in that, and what that says itself, is all that one needs to know about Jeannie.
Jeannie Rousseau, one of the great women of World War II. That's feminism. Well, we're going to move on now from feminism to hockey, and one other program does that. And we're going to talk a little bit about Pierre Pilote, who died recently at the age of 85. If you're a Chicago Blackhawks fan of a certain age, you'll remember Pierre Pilote because he was a member of the great Chicago Blackhawks teams of the early 1960s, along with Bobby Hull, Stan Mikita, and Glenn Hall. He was a left-handed defenseman, but since his early career was as a center, he had an offensive bend to him, and he was one of the first defensemen who would turn around with the puck and play offense, so he was sort of a model for Bobby Orr. He was a tough guy. He's one of the greatest Chicago Blackhawks in history, and he's also one of the greatest defensemen in history. Made the Hall of Fame in 1975. His biggest claim to fame with the Blackhawks was he was the captain of the 1961 team that won the Stanley Cup. They beat the Canadiens, who had won the Cup 5 years in a row, in the semifinals, and they beat Gordie Howe and the Red Wings in the final. Here he talks with Bobby Orr about his career, Bobby Hull, Stan Mikita, and playing defense.
For 12 of 13 seasons, Pierre Pilote fortified the Chicago Blackhawk defense. Generally recognized as one of the first offensive defensemen, the aggressive Pilote captured the James Norris Trophy for 3 consecutive years, a record surpassed by only Bobby Orr and the great Doug Harvey. Pierre Pilote joined Bobby Orr to recall his career with the Chicago Blackhawks. After a junior career in St. Catharines, it took 4 years with Buffalo before Pilote joined the Chicago lineup as a hard-hitting defenseman in 1956. The Hawks had missed the playoffs 10 of the last 11 years. With spirited players such as Stan Mikita, Pilote matured offensively, finishing 8th in scoring in 1965. He captured the Norris Trophy in 63, 64, and 65.
When did you realize, hey, I can play with the Blackhawks?
Somehow, over one game I'd play, made a few plays, and all of a sudden the game seemed to become easy for me. Like it just happened to me, and from then on I felt that I belonged in the NHL.
When I say Bobby Hall, what comes to mind?
Well, first thing, when he first joined our club, I remember him wearing loafers with little pennies in them. That's going back a long time.
And Stan Mikita?
I think they were equally great. Bobby probably had more fan draw, but I'll tell you, Stan was a tremendous hockey player. You look at his minus and plus, and he's on the winning side.
The Blackhawks of the 60s were an offensive machine, finishing no worse than 3rd. In 1961, Pilote led the league in penalty minutes and tied the great Gordie Howe in playoff scoring as he captained the Hawks to their first Stanley Cup since 1938 under Rudy Pillis, the man who had brought him to Chicago.
Well, that was our first cup, our only cup while I was there. It was a big letdown once we won it, as far as I was concerned. Worked so hard for it, and all of a sudden, you got it.
Pilote, Mikita, Hall, so many great hockey players. Why only one Stanley Cup?
I think we played a pleasing brand of hockey, I guess, which was offensive-minded. Some coach would try to change the style of Chicago while Bobby and Stan was there, and it never worked. Just had to let them play that style of hockey.
You didn't become a great defenseman by mistake. You worked very hard at it.
I was not ashamed to say that I've copied players and trying to utilize their best move. One that was playing very well was Doug Harvey. Go watch one defenseman hitting one guy a certain way, and I went back and practiced for about a week, and I remember to this day, the first guy that I hit with was Eric Nestorenko, and they took him out in a stretcher. I tell you, it works.
Pilote's last year was 1969 with Toronto. That same year, Bobby Orr broke Pilote's single-season point record for a defenseman. But it is as captain of the Cup-winning Blackhawks that this Hall of Famer is remembered. 3 times voted the league's outstanding defenseman and 8 All-Star selections. Pierre Pilote, a hockey legend.
I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Taps. We're going to close tonight with Don Williams, who died recently at the age of 78. Great country singer and also a superb country songwriter. He recorded a lot of country music songs, but he recorded 2 great ones, and I'm going to play both of them. The first is one that he recorded, and my man Waylon Jennings covered it the next year. I'll let you decide which you like better. Here's Don Williams first.
Amanda, light of my life, fate should have made you a gentleman's wife. Amanda, light of my life, fate should have made you a gentleman's wife.
Awfully good, but I'm slightly partial to Waylon's version.
Amanda, light of my life, fate should have made you a gentleman's wife. Amanda, light of my life, fate should have made you a gentleman's wife.
But as a final tribute to Don Williams, we're going to play a song he recorded in 1978 that went to the top of the country charts. It was so good that when Eric Clapton heard him do it, he decided to cover it too. Here is Don Williams' classic recording of Tulsa Time.
I left Oklahoma